Welcome everyone. This is a pre-recorded video that accompanies the text for the funding opportunity entitled Precision Prevention, Biological Mechanisms of Response Variation. So the aim of this video is to emphasize some of the key points of the text and assist you in the writing of your application. So my name is Graham Campbell. I'm a head of program at MRC for Population and Systems Medicine. And I'm joined today by Florence Leberge, who is a program manager and experimental medicine panel lead here at MRC. So this video will cover the key points related to the remit of this funding opportunity. We will discuss the types of project that are in scope, and importantly, the types of work that is not within the scope of this opportunity. We will discuss the application process and how your application will be assessed across the expression of interest and invited full application stage. And we'll offer some helpful tips on preparing your application and common pitfalls to avoid. We'll end with a frequently asked questions slide and a few different illustrative case studies of what would be in and out of scope of this opportunity. So just a bit of background information to this opportunity. So this schematic on the right outlines MRC's priorities. The overall aim is to improve human health and drive economic growth through a mechanistic understanding of biology and disease, enabling earlier diagnosis, advanced therapies, and precision prevention. So precision prevention is one of our key priorities going forward and the subject of this funding opportunity. So this is essentially about understanding illness to protect and promote health, and has really three key points. So stopping health tipping into illness by developing interventions, improving health and health equity, and protecting the population from emerging threats. So this aligns with the 10-year health plan for England, and one of the key themes in moving from sickness to prevention to try and reverse the negative trend of ill health and help people avoid the burden of illness. So precision prevention can be defined as taking into account how variation or heterogeneity shapes disease risk and intervention response. In its entirety, it is about identifying who is at risk, when risk emerges, the transition between health and disease, why disease trajectories differ between individuals and populations, and which interventions are most likely to work for specific people, groups, or contexts. So heterogeneity is commonly observed in response, risk reduction, adverse effects, and clinical outcomes associated with biomedical interventions. The biological mechanistic pathways underpinning this variation are poorly understood. So this funding opportunity is therefore designed to fund research that investigates the underpinning biological mechanisms of why those individuals and populations respond differently to biomedical interventions in the context of prevention. So that could be looking at current biomedical prevention interventions and using this opportunity to better understand those underpinning biological mechanisms. It's also about understanding and exploring the biological mechanisms governing that transition from health to early disease that can then be used to inform the future development and targeting of biomedical interventions. So the approach that this funding opportunity is taking is through experimental medicine, which is a broad term referring to investigations undertaken in humans to identify underpinning biological mechanisms. So the key aspects of this is that applicants must focus on a mechanistic hypothesis. So this is about testing an existing hypothesis rather than using this opportunity to develop a hypothesis. It's also about including an experimental intervention or challenge in humans that perturbs the pathway or system that you hypothesize to be involved. So this is a useful slide which really outlines the remit of this funding opportunity, what is in scope and what, just as importantly, is not. So it's mandatory that you are using a biomedical agent with an established safety profile that you will use in humans to perturb a pathway or system to test a mechanistic hypothesis. Therefore, your primary experimental outcomes must be mechanistic in nature. You may use this opportunity to improve the mechanistic understanding of how current interventions modify biological pathways across different population groups, enabling more personalized and equitable prevention approaches and avoiding harm. You may also be generating mechanistic insights into early disease pathways where there is no current interventions, or at least limited, and this can then inform the future development and tailoring of novel precision prevention interventions and/or the stratification of populations. So as part of the project, you may include the validation of mechanistically linked surrogate endpoints that reflect response to preventative interventions, as long as this is not the sole focus of your project. You may also measure the effect of additional pathway modifiers that may act on that biological pathway, but again, this should not be the sole focus of your application. You are permitted to ask for some limited non-funding experimental funding, and this is eligible for support, but it must be a relatively minor part of the project. The majority of the project must be using an experimental medicine approach, and therefore the mechanistic insight must be generated by using a biomedical challenge in humans. So on the right-hand side, we've got some non-exhaustive examples of the types of activities that would not be in Remit for this funding opportunity. So use of an intervention that is not a biomedical intervention, primary outputs that are not biological or mechanistic in nature. This opportunity is not about addressing tertiary prevention or disease management. This is not about omics studies or fishing exercises not linked back to a clear hypothesis. This is about testing a predefined hypothesis that you have. This is not about biomarker discovery and preclinical model development and validation. This opportunity is about finding mechanistic evidence that may enable the future development of novel interventions, so it's not about developing the intervention itself. And as mentioned before, this is not about simply understanding if intervention works or not. It is really principally about that mechanistic understanding. We encourage potential applicants to contact us to arrange a discussion around Remit suitability before applying, and we'll hand out the email address towards the end of this presentation. So at the end of your project, we expect the potential outputs to be along the lines of the following. So validation of a mechanistic hypothesis explaining why individuals or population groups respond differently to a biomedical prevention intervention. Mechanistic evidence linking intervention-induced biological changes to disease initiation or early disease progression, allowing for that future novel targeted prevention strategy. Mechanistic evidence distinguishing responders from non-responders and those in between, therefore helping to enhance population stratification to optimize intervention targeting. So moving on to the application process. So there are two stages to this funding opportunity. The first is a mandatory expression of interest stage, and the second is an invited full application stage. So the budget for this opportunity is £15 million in total, and you may request up to £5 million at full economic cost. MRC will fund 80% of the FEC amount and 100% of the permitted exceptions. The duration of your project can be between 3 and 5 years. So you'll note that in this timeline below that the full application stage opens prior to the EOI stage closing. This is by design and allows you hopefully to familiarize yourself with the full application process and begin the application if you wish at an earlier time point. So there is a link in the opportunity text which will take you to a survey for this EOI stage, which must be completed by the 17th September by 4 p.m. The survey asks you for some basic information on your project title and team, and then a series of questions on your vision, approach, and proposed intervention. Please note that these should be non-confidential, as we'll use this information to pre-approach peer reviewers, and we will use the EOI to check Remit and fit to funding opportunity scope and select a panel. Importantly, we should say that we do reserve the right to add a shortlisting stage at this point in the event of high demand. We'll then email you as soon as possible with an invite or not to the full application stage. So in anticipation of being invited to the full application stage, you may begin your application prior to the invite, as I've mentioned. So within the full application, it will be necessary to expand on the detail of your application, and your application will be then sent to peer reviewers, and you'll have an opportunity to respond to the comments. All of this information will be reviewed by a panel that we will select. Peer reviewers and the panel will assess your application against the following information that you provide. Again, this can also be found in the how we will assess your application section on the funding finder as part of the full application text. So this is the vision of the project, the intervention, the capability of the applicants and team to deliver the project, ethical and responsible research and innovation considerations of the project, resources requested to do the project. The peer reviewers and panel will also assess your approach to your project, including project plan and milestones, methodology and experimental design, reproducibility and statistical design, risk management, research in environment and infrastructure, plans for patient and public involvement, communication and engagement, and data management and sharing plans. So the panel meeting may be in the form of an interview. So we will email all applicants invited to the full application stage with confirmation of this process and the dates. Ultimately, the panel will score your application out of 10 using the harmonized UKRI scoring system. The panel will rank the applications and make a recommendation to MRC on which applications to fund. We invite you to look at these MRC web pages listed here on the slide, which gives more information on the peer review and panel assessment. So I'll hand over to Florence at this stage. Thank you.
Thank you, Graham. So yes, over the next few slides, I will talk you through key details to consider when preparing your full application. Right. So when writing your proposal, as you know, it's important to tailor it to the audience. As Graham mentioned, your proposal will be sent out first to external peer reviews where it will be assessed by experts in the field. You will have an opportunity to address the reviews. Then the reviews alongside your response will be considered by a panel who will have a broader expertise for a final assessment of your application. So it is important for your proposal to address both an expert and general scientific audience. In your application, start by clearly outlining the gap in mechanistic understanding, and by doing so, placing your study in the wider research and clinical need landscape to assess its potential clinical impact. As mentioned in the previous slides, by experimental medicine, we mean investigational studies in human to gain mechanistic insight, which in this case will be used to generate more targeted prevention interventions. It is therefore key for your proposal to clearly articulate a well-defined mechanistic hypothesis anchored on robust preliminary data, a biomedical intervention with a safety profile established, justifying their choice in probing the system and testing the hypothesis that you have stated. For the external reviewers and the panel to assess your application, please provide sufficient details about your choice of experimental approach, study population, and study design, and why this project plan that you will adopt will be the most suitable way to achieve the stated objectives. Your application will be reviewed by medical statisticians. Therefore, ensure that you have appropriate statistical support within your core team and provide enough detail in your statistical analysis plan for a statistician expert to replicate your power calculations. Justify your statistical design or model choice to ensure that the study is sufficiently powered, as Graham said, for mechanistic understanding using mechanistic endpoint as primary endpoints. You are allowed to have some efficacy signal as secondary endpoints. So the other point to note is milestones, which are another key element of experimental medicine studies. These are key go-no-go time point in the project with defined target and acceptable thresholds, and which will allow you to assess whether the project can progress to the next phase. I will discuss this element of the application in more details in the next few slides. Finally, ensure that you have all range of skills and experience represented in the core team and the project partners to guarantee the project deliverability. So there are some of the common issues listed on this slide in applications that we see in experimental medicine studies, starting with a project that often lack a clear mechanistic hypothesis or fail to explain how the study design will test that stated hypothesis. The other pitfall we see is that team may also be missing key expertise needed for the successful delivery of the projects. Other concerns include insufficient justification of the experimental design, the power calculations, questions around the feasibility or poorly defined milestones that are difficult to assess or are not linked to meaningful go, no-go decision points. As Graham mentioned, it's important for application to demonstrate robust risk mitigation and patient safety planning alongside clear roles, responsibilities, and commitment from all project partners. So as you prepare your application, keeping these common pitfalls in mind can help you build a stronger and more competitive proposal from the outset. So as mentioned earlier, milestones are an integral part of experimental medicine studies. And those are, as I mentioned, critical go, no-go decision-making points within your projects, and they are used to assess your project progressions. So the why we adopt that milestone gating approach to our experimental medicine awards, the reason is twofold. First is that it allows the MRC to invest in inherently risky projects. And as you can see as well, the second reason is represented on this diagram. Experimental medicine award holders needs to provide us with regular updates on the project progress through 3 types of reports: quarterly, milestone, and end reports. This allows us to, this is our approach to post-award monitoring, and this allows us to demonstrate the impact of our investment as well as mitigating those inherently risky projects. So how do we use our milestone in our post-award management? Well, as you can see here, each milestone has defined criteria, a budget, and a time frame. Spending should therefore be restricted to activities within the current milestone, because when it comes to the time of a milestone, you submit this milestone report, which is sent for review by the panel and the MRC, who needs then to approve the milestone before moving on to the next project phase. And starting the activities belonging to the next milestone without that previous approval from the MRC would be at the lead organization's own risk. So this slide introduced the SMART framework, which you may be familiar with, which we use to define robust and meaningful milestone success criteria. The purpose is to ensure that milestones are clear, measurable, and generally demonstrate progress towards project objectives. First, milestones should be specific. So that means that the milestone objective must be clearly articulated so that we understand exactly what is expected. And ambiguous and overly broad statement can make it very difficult to assess whether the milestone has been achieved. Second, the milestones need to be measurable. You should define milestone success criteria that allow us to determine whether the delivery has occurred. Wherever possible, this includes setting realistic target values or acceptable range with clear cutoff thresholds. Third, milestone must be achievable. While milestone should be ambitious enough to drive progress, they must remain realistic and attainable within the available resources, timeframe, and the project constraints. Setting up overly ambitious milestone can create unnecessary risk and undermine delivery. Fourth, milestones should be relevant. So every task and deliverable associated with a milestone should contribute directly to advancing the project and support the overall project plan. And finally, milestone must be timely. Each milestone should have a clearly defined completion date, and the focus is on achieving this milestone, that set of criteria by that agreed time frame. The important point here to keep in mind is that while project tasks and work packages may run concurrently across different milestones, the milestones themselves, because those are the go-no-go time points, they must not overlap and must occur at the distinct sequential time points. This slide represents two examples of poorly written milestones, starting with the first one, complete recruitment. It is not specific, there is no time frame, and therefore very difficult to assess what will be achieved and when. So if we reframe that using that SMART approach, it becomes recruit 50% of study participants with a rate of 4 patients per month, acceptable range of 2 patients per month by month 12. It becomes a specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and timely milestone. Applying that to the second poorly written example, secure all necessary regulatory approvals, target value of achieving those by 6 months or acceptable by 9 months, which, as you know, is not possible because milestones need to be at the same time point. And we have no idea about what regulatory approval are required and the range of activities. So if we reframe that using the SMART framework, obtain approval from the research ethics committees and health research authority, ensure study sponsor approval and clinical site is set up ready for recruitment within 9 months. So hopefully those examples give you the idea of what we mean by milestones so that you can adapt that approach to your project. And this is a slide which outline a few online resources that you can use during your application preparation, starting with MRC science areas and the contact if you want more details about those scientific areas, a link on our peer review process, and 2 helpful links on helping you to write your applications. We also have put here on that slide the link to our Gateway to Research, which provide a range of the MRC funded awards. And as Graham mentioned, if you have any questions before applying, please contact the email address reported on this slide. So we have some case study coming up to better illustrate the scope of this opportunity, but these are by no means exhaustive.
Yeah, thanks very much, Florence. I'll just go through these. So we've got case study 1 here. So this is a project that was submitted that is designed to understand the mechanistic basis between pre-diabetes and established diabetes. The project team hypothesized that pathway X is involved in this process. Team plan to challenge participants with pre-diabetes with a biological compound that perturbs pathway X, and that is currently in use as a treatment for established disease. Some animal work is undertaken at the beginning of the project, but only to inform the main experimental medicine study. The team will primarily measure a series of mechanistic readouts for which the study has been appropriately powered. And they will also validate a series of surrogate endpoints and collect information on additional modifiers of the pathway, for example, here, physical activity. So the potential results of this project could be that they will validate their hypothesis that pathway X is involved, and this leads to a future MRC translation grant to develop a more effective intervention and or stratification of the population so that a certain subgroup is targeted. It could also inform further discovery-led hypothesis generating work to investigate the pathway in more detail in preclinical settings. So this is an example of a case study that would be in the scope of this opportunity. So case study 2 is a project submitted which plans to recruit adults with pre-diabetes and undertake a series of omics studies to better understand the link between pre and established disease. So this is an example of a study that is not in scope of this opportunity because primarily it is an exploratory study. So for case study 3, this is a project which plans a randomized trial of a lifestyle intervention of adults at high risk of diabetes. So this is an example of a project, again, not in scope, because it is not using a biomedical intervention, and it is an efficacy trial for all intents and purposes, which is not within the scope of this opportunity. And case study 4 is a project which has submitted plans to challenge humans with advanced heart failure to validate a mechanistic hypothesis that an inflammatory pathway is involved. And this is not in scope of this opportunity because this is primarily looking at disease management or tertiary prevention. Again, these are illustrative examples and by no means exhaustive. And please do get in touch if you do have any questions around the remit of this opportunity. So for the final slide, we're just going to go over a few frequently asked questions, which we hope will add to this presentation. So Florence will be asking some questions on eligibility and I will answer those. So over to you, Florence.
Okay, so starting with the first question on eligibility, who can apply to this funding opportunity?
So normal UKRI eligibility rules apply. So you must be at an eligible research organisation and show that you will direct the project as project lead. You can find further information on the criteria on the funding page and on the UKRI website.
Thank you. Can I be involved in several applications?
You can be involved in several applications, but in terms of project lead, you can only be involved in one application.
Do I need an industrial partner for this opportunity?
So that's not a mandatory requirement. It does depend on the project needs. So if you do have a project partner in mind or an industry partner in mind that you've been talking to, we would encourage you to visit the MRC's pages on the industrial collaboration framework and then consult the decision tree, which you can find on that website. So you can understand how exactly to include that partner in your application and so that it matches MRC's expectations around academic industry partnerships.
Can I just apply for the full opportunity?
Quite simply, no. The EOI stage is mandatory.
Can I change aspect of my project between the expression of interest stage and the full application stage?
So we would suggest it's unlikely you would change the subject matter of the project, but you may change the team and the project duration, for example, in between those two stages, yes.
Thank you. If I've applied in the past for the MRC experimental medicine funding opportunity, can I resubmit the application to this funding opportunity?
So if your application was submitted prior to April 26, and there's been a year in between you first submitting your application and then submitting this one, then you may resubmit, yes, to this opportunity, as long as it fits the scope of the call. So you may need to change some of the aspects of your original application, and you should, within that, carefully consider the feedback to your original application. We would encourage you to contact us in this scenario.
Thank you.
I'm going to now focus on asking some questions to Florence around the remit and the application itself. So, Florence, can my project involve product design?
So your project can inform how a new precision intervention could be developed or how a current one modified. But the primary aim of that funding opportunity and therefore the project must be an underpinning biological mechanistic output to inform that future development of that intervention.
Thank you. So I don't have a specific hypothesis. Can I use this opportunity to generate one?
Simply no. You can not use this opportunity to use a tool compound to probe, to find a pathway of interest. This funding opportunity, as you've heard in this webinar, it's really about testing a well-defined, well-articulated mechanistic hypothesis using that biomedical intervention.
So can I investigate a behavioral intervention at all?
No, you must be using a biomedical interventions, for example, a pharmacological or immunological agent.
I'm not familiar with milestones. How do I find out more about this aspect of the application process?
So hopefully the slides have shed some light onto the milestones requirements and how we use them as a part of our post-award monitoring. But if you need more information, then you can find more details on the funding opportunity and the MRC Experimental Medicine web page. And if after reviewing those web pages, you still have specific questions, then please contact us and we can arrange a discussion.
So what data on a biomedical agent do I need to present in my application?
So we need that agent or that intervention to have a safety profile established. So the data you need, the information you need to provide is principally around that safety profile of the intervention to be used in humans. And if applicable, show how any data from previous use in previous mechanistic studies. You should outline as well why is this intervention the best choice to use and test and probe the system to test the mechanistic hypothesis.
Thank you. Is this just a clinical trial? Do I need to involve a clinical trials unit in my application?
Yep. So while this opportunity is designed for using to be conducted in human participant, phase 1 to 3 clinical trials are designed to test the safety, toxicity, and efficacy of an intervention rather than to better define a mechanistic understanding of how a drug works. So this can be this is not what we're looking for in this funding opportunity. We could looking more at a clinical investigational study. So there is no requirement for a registered clinical trial unit or CTU to be involved into that clinical investigational study. However, the panel will assess whether the project team has access to the appropriate expertise, infrastructure, and governance arrangement in place to deliver the studies effectively. So the applicant should ensure that the chosen approach is appropriate to the complexity and the requirement of their study and is clearly justified within the application.
Do I need to attach a SOCAT form?
So the SOCAT is designed to ensure that costs are appropriately attributed according to the accord principle by clearly allocating them to 3 types of costs: research, NHS support, and treatment costs. You therefore are likely to need to complete such a form if you are using NHS resources, but this is only required at the full application stage.
And finally, who will assess my application?
So as mentioned before, your expression of interest will allow us to see the level of interest in the call and also select the panel. So the stage is primarily to check Remit, but we reserve the right to add a shortlisting stage at this point if the demand is high. The full application, as Graham mentioned, will undergo a peer review and will then be viewed by a panel who will make a score against the assessment criteria, which are stated in the full opportunity text. That range from a score of 1 to 10 using the UKRI scoring matrix. The panel will then make a recommendation to the MRC, and the MRC will make the final funding decision.
Thank you very much. So that brings us to the end of this presentation and this video. They will be attached to the funding finder and the call text. We hope you found it useful. Please do email us at that address if you have any questions or you want to discuss any aspects of your application. And thank you for your time today and good luck with the writing of your application. Thank you very much.